We are in Siman Reish Pei Ches. Ketzad Koisvin es ha-mezuzah. How is one meant to write a mezuzah? Koisvin shtei parshi Shema v'hayim shamaya al daf echad b'yiriya achas. You write, so here you have a mezuzah, you write two parshias, Shema and v'hayim shamaya. Al daf echad means on one column, b'yiriya achas means one piece of cloth. Va'oisala, yeah, you know, should I hold it up the whole time? Or that's it. Okay. Va'oisala revach milamata, v'revach milamal. If you each take a look at your mezuzahs, and now look at my mezuzah, so you'll see that my fellow was machmir in how much space he left, right? Because there's a big sugya how much you meant to leave. In all of your mezuzahs, I imagine there's not nearly this much space, but there is K'may chetzi tziporen. Ubitchilasa, here as well, you'll see on most of your mezuzahs, it's a shayla. Ubitchilasa, and in the beginning, on the right side of the mezuzah, Yeshaya kedei logol oisa achar shetichrach. You should leave enough space. So here, if you see, in my mezuzah, he left a lot of space, right? So that's enough space that when you roll the mezuzah, the empty space will be enough to wrap around the circumference of the mezuzah. Now, in most of your mezuzahs, you will probably notice that you don't have that much space. If you want to know why, so take a look in the Chazon Ish where he has a tshuva from his father, and his father explains why we don't have that minig. There's also the Kesef HaSefer who says that it has to be enough space that theoretically, if you wound it as tight as humanly possible, it would wrap around. So it's possible that some of your mezuzahs have that, but most mezuzahs don't have that. Well, I'm saying it's a halacha that you're supposed to do, but there are various heterim and reasons why we don't do it. But, you see this sefer, he did it. And at the end of the mezuzah, you don't have to leave any space at all. Now, any space at all doesn't mean that the letter could be touching the lip of the cloth, because you need what's called hakafas gvil. It has to have a mashahu of cloth before the end, but it means that you don't need a margin per se. Halacha based. As we said, needs to be in one column. In other words, you can't have the two parashiyas, Sheman v'hayim Shemaya, side by side. In a pair of tefillin, Sheman v'hayah side by side. Over here, it's one on top of the other. If you did write it side by side, the mezuzah would be kosher. No. Kasva shaloy al haseder. If the mezuzah was written out of order, afilu shachach milichtayv ois achas psula. Even if you forgot to write one letter, it's puzzle. So take a look at your mezuzah. Let's say the first word of v'haya, the vav of v'hayam shamaya, right? If you skipped, you're a sefer, or you're not a sefer. A sefer was writing a mezuzah, and he's writing the mezuzah, and he skipped the vav of v'hayam shamaya, and he's about 5 lines further, and he realizes, so he says, oh, look, there's plenty of space there. I'll just fill in the vav. So that is called shaloi kisidron, means the mezuzah was written out of order, and the mezuzah is puzzle. Every letter has to be written sequentially, in order. So achas psula. Even if let's say he forgot the vav and then he wrote the hey of v'haya, and then he went back and wrote the vav, that would also be puzzle. It could be, as long as there's one letter out of order, it's puzzle. The ain la takana, and there's no way to fix the mezuzah. The ain tzarech leimar im hiktim parsha la parsha. If he wrote v'hayim shamaya before Shema, that's for sure puzzle. Now the Taz argues on that, and the Taz says that would be kosher, but we don't paskin like that Taz. Now, if you take a look in the Shach, towards the end of Sif Cotton Bays, the Mechaber made a statement that if you wrote the mezuzah out of order, it can't be fixed. So the Shach says it's not 100% accurate. Ulefizeh yochel ligror mimata ulemala ad mokem hachisaron v'yichtov sham hachisaron v'achar kach yichtov mashagorar al mokem hagrar. What does that mean? That means as follows. Let's say, again, here, look at your mezuzah. Let's say you forgot to write the vav of v'haya, okay? So you wrote, Haya im shamaya tishma'u el mitzvaysai asher anoichi, right? And then you get to the end of the line, and all of a sudden you realize, oh my goodness, I forgot the vav of Ahaya. So we just said you can't fill in the vav. That's also that's like a sidra on the mezuzah's puzzle. But what can you do? Says the shach. You can erase everything you wrote. Erase. Now that line is blank, and now start again. So this that the mechaber says ein lei takana means ein lei takana by just filling it in. But if you erase backwards, you can. Now the place can say that that's only provided that you wrote S. And before you wrote the Shem Hashem, you realized. So now you can erase back and rewrite it in order. But once you wrote Hashem, you're cooked. Nothing you could do. Just the Yud you're allowed to erase. Klifa, so excellent. So we don't do Klifa in Mezuzahs. We only do Klifa in Sifrei Torah, or Rabbi Friedlander held in the fourth parasha of a Shalyad of Tefillin, because then it's called a Hefsid Meruba, and if it's called a Hefsid Meruba, then you could be makel to go to a Sfardi to be Kailif for you. But in a Mezuzah, he held that that's not called enough of a Hefsid Meruba, and one may not be makel. And that's the minig, I believe. Okay, so that's the shach and sifkat base. Halacha dalet. Kosva b'shnei oires. If you had, right, we mentioned that it has to be on one piece of cloth. So what if you took two pieces of cloth, afal pisha tofran, and you sewed them together? Psula. The mezuzah is going to be puzzle. It has to be one piece of cloth, period. Halacha hey. Tzricha ibud lishma lechatchila. The mezuzah needs ibud lishma, right, which we discussed in the past, means that the processing of the hides has to be done l'shem kedushas mezuzah. Aval b'mokim shem yamtin la'or me'ubud lishma yizbatel meha mitzvah. I can get cloth me'ubud lishma, but it's coming from the Ukraine, right, or it's coming from Turkey, right, or Poland, right. These are places where they do ibud, right. So I can get it, but it's going to take 2 weeks to get here. But I'm moving in today, and I have a mezuzah that's not me'ubed lishma. So that's what he's saying. I'm going to lose 2 weeks. So then, yichtaven al arsha einim me'ubed hanimtza v'yikayim hamitzvah miyad ba'or shemevakish ba'od shemevakish ar me'ubed lishma. No, put in your order, wait for it to come. Right, but in the meantime, use a mezuzah that's not me'ubed lishma. So you would think that this has no practical ramifications, but it actually does, because we discussed, or maybe we didn't discuss, I don't remember, the subject of klaf mechona versus the subject of klaf avodas yad. Klaf can be made by machine, like matzahs. You can have machine matzahs or handmade matzahs. So you can have machine-made klaf or handmade klaf. So what's the problem with the machine-made klaf? The problem with the machine-made klaf is that there are some poskim that hold that that's not called ibud lishma. Same thing as by matzah, right? You need l'shem matzah's mitzvah. So for the seder, there are people that won't use machine matzah because they hold that machine matzahs are not me'ubed lishma, are not baked lishma. So too over here, there are poskim that hold ibud klaf by way of machine is a chisaron in lishma. There are other shilas as well. There are mekilim, there are machmirim. I'm not here to be machriya that shaila. I'm just saying, let's say you hold that machine klaf is no good, and you want to get klaf avodas yad, but you're moving into your apartment today, and the only mezuzah available is machine klaf mezuzah. So that's what this mechaber is saying. So you should put that up, keep your order in for the other mezuzah, but in the meantime, you could use this mezuzah. And the reason is because the Rambam is makel that you don't need ibud lishma by a mezuzah. That's so from tell you when you buy a mezuzah, if it's avodas yad. Did they tell you? No. If you ask.
It says that it's avodas yad.
Yeah, but the mezuzahs don't have. They don't come in a package with a label. Although now they do. If you buy mezuzahs with hashgacha from an organization called Stamp, you can get a mezuzah in a package with a label. But other than that, mezuzahs don't come in a package with a stamp, so you have to ask. Halacha vav. Kosva ala klaf, ala gvil, ksheira. Lo yamru desustas ela mitzvah. What this means is as follows. There's 3 types of hides. I mean, there's one type of hide, but when you have the hide So the way a hide is that it's like the skin of a human, right? It's just an animal, right? So the skin of a human, or the skin of an animal rather, is quite thick, and there's an outer layer where the hair is, and then there's an inner layer in the kishkis, and then there's a middle layer that's just like guk, veins and just guk. So when you process the whole thing as one, so that's like what we saw from the Teimanim, the thicker, more carpet-like cloth. So that's called gvil. Okay. Now what Ashkenazim do, and Svardim, just not Teimanim, is that they split the hides. Okay. Now you can split the hides by scraping away part of it. There's different ways of doing it. I mean, today we just scrape it, but the point is that there's two halves of the hide. So the outer half is called klaf, and the inner half is called duchsustus. So Mezuzah, the Gemara says, should be written on duchsustus. So that's what he's saying over here. Kasva al haklaf, if you wrote it on klaf, oy al hagvil, or on gvil, they're both kosher, even though the Gemara says to write a Mezuzah on duchsustus. Why? Because le'amru duchsustus ela lemitzvah. Because that's just the ideal. But the other two would also be kosher. You're thinking, so how come all our mezuzahs are on klaf? Says the Ramah, uklafim shalanu ksherim lakol. Our klaf is kosher for everything, and we saw back in Hilchos Sefer Torah that the Ramah says that our klaf is the most muhuder because it's lighter and it's nicer, etc., etc. So that's what we use today. Which side of the duchsustus do you write on? That's a great question. If my memory serves me right, I think you write on the kishkis side of the duchsustus, on the inner side, not on the. Well, I'm saying with the duchsustus, they're both inner, but not the part with the klipa, rather the other side. No, the duchsustus is the inside. So the outside of the inside.
In other words, you write on the side facing the hair.
I think so.
Yeah.
Of course, there's people, in the old city, who want to bring this back into style.
Why is it better?
So I think, if I'm not mistaken, Rabbeinu Hananel or Rabbeinu Gershon explains that the reason why the Gemara says that a Sefer Torah should be on Gvil and a Mezuzah should be on Duchsustus and Tefillin should be on Klaf is because each one is most appropriate for that scroll. As Tefillin are very small, very thin, so the Klaf is the thinnest. And a Sefer Torah could be heavier, and he explains why each one is the most appropriate. I think Mezuzah will last longest, perhaps. I don't remember. But like the Ramah says, today we are of the belief that our Klaf is superior, and everybody, as I say, except for Teimanin, everybody uses Klaf today for everything. Zayin, Dina l'inyan aksiva v'atagin shel shatnez gets k'may b'sefer Torah. The halachas of the ink and all the halachas of writing and the tagim. If you look at your mezuzahs, you'll see that the letters shin, ayin, tes, nun, zayin, gimel, and sadi all have tagim on them. So those halachas are all the same as a sefer Torah. Ches, tzricha sirtut, v'im kasva b'loy sirtut psula. Now, what's sirtut? So if you look at your mezuzah, you will see that it has lines scored into the mezuzah. Yes, you could definitely see it in the right margin. And if you look between the letters or between the words, you'll see it there as well. And unlike in English, when you write, so the bottom of the letter is on the line. Over here, the top of the letter is in the line. And the reason is because when you're using a kolmus, it's easier. The sirtut serves as a guide for the kolmus. That's a technical thing. I'm saying it's not ma'akif, but you could use the sirtut the other way as well, I believe. If the bottom of, like in English, if the bottom of the letter was on the sirtut.
Just stop your letter on the sirtut.
But you hang, you always wait so that you hang the letters.
Right. So instead of hanging it, you would sit them on the sirtut. I actually never saw the Paiskim talk about that. I made that up, that it would be okay, but I think that that's correct, that it would be okay. If
don't have to touch the sirtut.
Yeah, they do. The letters do have to touch the sirtut.
Right in between the line.
So you're allowed to write in between the line as long as it's very close to the sirtut. Now, what's the gather of very close? It's something that you need shimush for. It's not something that you can give over balpeh. There's no halacha that it has to touch, but it has to be very close. If it's more than Rav Fisher held 2 kashim away from the sirtut, it's no good. What's 2 kashim? Good luck. But
It's only on the bottom.
let me see. Yeah, okay. So now you know why it was in Gniza. Okay, say that. The sirt, yeah. Some of them are totally in between. Yeah. So this is a puzzle mezuzah. For that reason, this is not written on the sirtut at all. No, you're right. Some have it written.
You would count for that.
Not because of the ones that are written on the bottom, but he has some lines here that are written in between the sirtut. Notice he's not consistent. If he would be consistent throughout, then there would be what to talk about. But he's not consistent. He moves around. That's absulda iraisa. Now, what if you have 1 or 2 letters? I'll just speak this out quickly. What if you have 1 or 2 letters or 3 letters that are not written on sirtut? Now, why would that be? So the reason is because the sefer made a mechika. He had to erase. And it was like in our previous example. Let's say he erased that line. And when he erased that line, the sirtut disappeared. And then he rewrote the line, and there's no sirtut there.
It disappears when you erase?
Sirtut disappears because sirtut is in the depth of the klaf, but when you erase, so you're lowering, it's like the street, right? When you dig up the street, so it's lower now. You have to, when you pave it, you're raising it again. So
should we be Masartet again?
oh, you absolutely should be. The question I'm dealing with is what if he didn't? So most places can hold it the mezuzah is puzzle. It's not kosher at all. Now there are those that are makel that if roiv of the line is mesurtut, that's kosher. Rabbi Yashiv didn't hold of that hat there. Rabbi Yashiv was willing to be makel up to 3 letters. Why up to 3 letters? Not clear, but that was Rabbi Yashiv shita. Others say that if even 1 letter is written not on the sirtut, the mezuzah is puzzle. Mida iraisa. Halacha tes. Kaisev kol shita seha shavos. All the lines of the mezuzah should be justified, right? In a Word document, right? The end of the line is always justified. So lahavdil, in a mezuzah, the lines should be justified. Shouldn't have 1 line longer than the other. And if letters do protrude, if you look on your mezuzahs, I'm sure you'll find on some of them that there are letters here or there that protrude into the margin on the left, beyond the sirtut, or the other way around. Instead of protruding into the margin, it ends short of the margin. In other words, lechatchila, it should be justified, but it's kosher if it's not. Ubilvad, I should have brought in a mezuzah with this. What that means is that if you have 3 consecutive lines protruding outward, right? Once again, if you look in the sefer inside stam, in the first thing in the sefer, I think the first picture in the sefer is a picture of Kuba V'Zanav. What Kuba V'Zanav means is that we just made a statement that the line should end justified. And if it doesn't end justified, it's not ma'akiv. Mezuzah is still kosher. Provided that you don't have 3 consecutive lines going further out. Notice if the first line goes out further than if the second line goes out, when I say second, I don't mean 1 and 2. It could be 17 and 18, whatever it is. But if the first line ends justified, the second line protrudes further than that, and the third line protrudes further than the second line, so that's called a shaila of Kuba V'Zanav.
It's like steps.
So that would be a psul. Now there's a huge machlokes. What's the shear of the protrusion that would passel? So Rabbi Yashiv held 1 letter. In other words, if a yud or a vav, let me rephrase that, a yud or vav's worth of letter, because if it's a tough, so it's much wider than a yud, right? So if the width of a yud on the second line is protruding more than the first line, and the width of a yud on the third line is protruding more than the second line, that's a psul of Kuba V'Zanav. However, you should know that a psul of Kuba V'Zanav can be fixed. How can you fix it? Because you could take the letter on the second line and extend it a little, right? Or if you're able to, you can take the letter on the second or third line and scrape a little, right? And in that way, you can manipulate the size of the ends of the lines such that it would be kosher. Al haaretz halacha yud yichtav b'reish shita achreina v'lo yichtav ba yoser. So if you look on your mezuzahs, you will see that the last two words in the mezuzah of al haaretz are written at the beginning of the line, and there is nothing written after it. Now, why is this? Says the Taz, halacha sivkat and hey. Hatam, the reason is the shita shelafaneh misayem es hashamayim, right? Because the line before it, right, kimei hashamayim al haaretz, ends with the word hashamayim. Urechoika mitchila shita achreina. The last letter on the line and the first letter on the line are as far away as could be. So hashamayim and al haaretz are very far away from each other, right? So urechoika me'aschal shita achreina, the siv sham al haaretz. Who remes? So what is this alluding to? Ki heichi de merchaki shamayim me'aretz, as far as the heavens are from the earth. Kain yirbu yemechem v'imei b'nechem. Right? The pasuk says over here, l'man yirbu yemechem v'imei b'nechem. You're going to have long life if you keep Hashem's mitzvahs. How much life? Kimei hashamayim al haaretz. That much, which means essentially as much as possible. Let's just do one more halacha. Let's just do two more. Halacha Yud Aleph. Nagu l'asaysa esrim v'shtayim shitin. The mezuzah is 22 lines. If you look at your mezuzahs, you will see that it's 22 lines. And the shach gives you, we even have a tradition as far as what should be the first letter on the line and the last letter on each line, which is kept until today. And it goes back thousands of years. And halacha Yud Beis, tzarech l'kasva b'yamin, k'may b'tfilin. Tfilin has to be written with the right hand. Can't be written with the mezuzahs have to be written with the right hand, not the left hand, same as tefillin and sefer Torah.
Who wrote Insight Stone? Rabbi Reuven Menlowitz.
Shkoyach, Rabbi Yosef.